Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 272. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm joined by author Kevin Hincker to talk about his new sci-fi novel, The Story Eaters of Yamm. This is a book about books and about the strange, brilliant minds who write them. The main character, Larry, is a struggling sci-fi author with a worldview that doesn't quite match the rest of society. Out of work and living with his mom, he gets roped into a market research meets thought experiment project alongside other sci-fi writers, all chosen for their ability to imagine the future. Their assignment? Gameplay and alien invasion. It's all fun and free lunches until the alien snails they've been inventing actually show up. In this love letter to the genre, Kevin leads into everything he adores about science fiction. Its humor, its imagination, and its willingness to ask big questions. In this episode, I'll chat with Kevin about his writing journey, how Larry reflects pieces of his own experience as a writer, and why character is always the starting point for his stories, as well as a few other things coming up. Kevin Hincker, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
It's such a pleasure to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, The Story Eaters of Yamm. If you don't mind, tell us a little about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Well, this book is a book about a book, which is a form that I've always been fascinated by. It's science fiction, but it's sort of literary adjacent science fiction. I guess it's sort of it's a more challenging one to categorize. But I was inspired to write it because I'd kind of gotten to the point in my writing career where I was looking back at the history of everything that I had written. I've written a number of other things and sort of wondering, like, why did I write those books instead of other books, and what was it that that's kind of driving me forward. And I love story just as a kind of a human undertaking, but beyond that, I feel like, particularly in this time in our culture where story is like oxygen, it's just every place and everyone's consuming it. And it seemed to me that the idea of story as a human undertaking had gotten sort of important in a different way than it used to be, So I wanted to write a story that kind of addressed that idea in some way. And so The Story Eaters of Yamm is what came out of my strange and science fiction adjacent mind.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that spark, that thing that you thought, okay, this is what I build this book around. Here is the thing. What was that for you? And when did it appear? Before you started writing or as you started writing?
For me, that kind of thing, I started writing as a playwright. I am a playwright, and the first things that I was ever sort of successful or engaged with an audience with, what the success or not of it is subject to debate, but were plays. I live in Los Angeles. I'm was at the time much more involved in the theatrical community. And so, but whether I'm doing it or not, still everything starts from character for me. So in this case, the genesis of this idea was this character who, for better or worse, I think is reflective of me. I was sort of looking at my journey as a writer and what I loved as a writer and what frustrated me as a writer. And there was a character that started to form. And so that was the genesis of it. This character in the book is a science fiction writer who is burdened, I suppose you could say, with sort of a very different view of reality, and which is often the way that I think about myself. So, so that's where it started. Maybe it could be that like it started as an excuse looking for a way to write about myself, I
Mm,
suppose, but without writing an autobiography. I don't know.
right, right, sure. Well, Larry is
Mhm.
the main character. Let's talk a little bit about him and his band of merry sci-fi writers.
Mhm.
What can you tell us about them?
Well, Larry gets kicked out of his house by his mother. Larry's in his mid 40s and told that he has to get a job because his mother has run out of money. It's more complicated than that, but in essence. And so Larry, with absolutely no skills, and in fact with a inability, literal inability a to tell time, um, goes off into the world to get this job that his mother has found for him at a research facility, like the people that do market research. So he goes in and he meets the other people who are to be in his market research cohort, and they are other science fiction writers. And the idea of the market research project is that this company wants to put together a bunch of science fiction writers because they are purportedly better at visioning the future. And actually, historically, this is something that research firms have done. The government has done it. Like they'll pull in Heinlein, for instance, and a couple of other big writers at the time. And they'll tell them, they told them, um, tell us what you think the future is going to be like in this particular. So anyway, so Larry gets involved with these people, but in order to make the book entertaining to myself, at least, I sort of took what would be stereotypes, I suppose, of writers of various different genres and put them all in this cohort. And then there's Larry, who's not a stereotype in any way. He's just sort of what he is. But there's, military science fiction writer and abduction science fiction writer, and just a number of different ones, all very, very different. None of them get along, although they know each other. And that's part of the friction that drives the story forward.
And you mentioned this is a book in a book.
Right.
So which came first, or did they come simultaneously? The story, the overall story, or the story within the story? Did you have to write one and then the other? Were you writing them
Mm.
both as simultaneously? How exactly did that work?
Well, the conceit of the book is that it is the book that it is a book about, right? So I guess the answer is they happen at the same time. I was interested in that form, like books about books, books about stories. I just love the exploration of story as a mechanical thing. How do you make a story work, and why do some stories work and some stories don't work, and what are the things about science fiction stories that work, and what do science fiction readers love? It's not strictly speaking a science fiction story because it's not about science. So you could say science fantasy or whatever genre you want to put in, but it's a deep exploration of some of the mechanics of storytelling themselves. And so putting it within this story about a story framework was just a natural step. But I think the answer to the question is that they're the same thing. in this case. The story about the story and the story that the story about the story is about are the same. Does that make any sense? I don't think
Yeah,
it does, but I think the book makes sense.
right, right. Well, and we should share with readers that this group of sci-fi writers comes up with a story that ends up happening.
Right.
So when you say it's a story about the story and it's the actual story, that's what is happening in the book. So I'm sure listeners, readers would be curious to know why you chose snails.
Hmm.
Like out of everything that could be a menace, it seems.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're, it seems sort of the first kind of knee jerk reaction from readers will be ew, right? And
Right.
that's powerful in and of itself.
Right.
But why snails?
Well, snails are sort of an overlooked adversarial species. Uh, and
That's
I
putting
thought
it mildly.
maybe time to give it their due. If for one thing, snails as an adversary are hilarious. I thought, who fights a snail? Like, well, how do you fight? How does a snail even fight you? So, the idea of setting them up as the antagonists in the story was honestly the first thought was, oh, that's funny. And of course, I should say that the entire thing, whatever other pretensions it might have to exploration of this or blah blah blah, in it's intended at one level and a really important level simply to be hilarious and entertaining, right? It's the characters are all very specific and do exactly what you would expect the character to do. I tell you what this character is, they do exactly that, and it's very weird. And they're all really funny and entertaining.
Yeah. Do you ever stop yourself while you're writing and think, okay, is that a step too far? Or do you
Mm,
say, no, no, I can do more. Like let me pile it
mm,
on. Let me pile on the crazy, like even higher.
yeah.
Is there a balance you're trying to achieve, or do you just write and check on it later in the editing?
Oh, as a first draft, I definitely don't. The first draft is an exploration of voice and structure and theme. The first draft is an exploration of character. So I definitely don't censor that. I will sometimes find in the process of first draft that I've gone too far in a certain direction. I try not to pay too much attention to that, but sometimes it's very obvious. So I'll dial it back or go a different direction. But in this book in particular, I was just sort of letting the voiciness just go. I wasn't saying, "Oh, that's too weird" or "That's too much," or because it's written from Larry's point of view, and Larry is, as I've been told by other by beta readers and such, is deeply neurodivergent. So the expression of his world ends up being, you know, pretty divergent. So I just let that go. My work tends to be pretty voicey. I love language. I love finding an unusual way to express an idea that's still very clear, but nothing you have heard before necessarily. I'm not trying to kind of repeat things I've heard before. I'm trying to make up new things. So this one is a bit wilder, perhaps, than my other work, but it all tends to be kind of wild. That's just the way it comes out. And if I'm not going to let it kind of come out the way it naturally wants to come out, then there's less point in doing it
Right,
for myself.
right. A lot of writers say that when they're writing, there are surprises as they're writing, turns the story takes, lines the
Yeah.
character says, actions that happen that you didn't anticipate. Were you finding that happening with this story? Since the first draft is really just sort of exploration. Let me see what's here. Let me see what this story is about, what these people have to say. Did you find those surprises as you were writing?
Oh, totally. As a because I my deepest work before I start something is character work. So I kind of get a real something clear and foundational to me for all of the characters, and then I kind of turn them loose. I'm pretty, I'm a plotter, not a pantser, so I know kind of mostly what's going to happen, although it doesn't always happen. But what always surprises me is once I sort of turn the characters on, I turn them on and then I just start typing, right? And they fill in the world that I've created for them, or they take it in a different direction. But that's always really surprising. I, I guess I should say, if I've done my work right, that's incredibly surprising. If I haven't done the work, the character work, then they just say the same old things and none of it's surprising. But if I've done the work, they're they're they entertain me,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So in this case, it was a lot of surprises because these are very atypical characters in, yeah, I don't know. Maybe other people wouldn't find them that way, but they surprised me endlessly. It was quite a pleasure to write, even though I was thinking, wow, this is so weird. But I was having a great time. So
Yeah. Well, and I was just going to ask if it was fun for you because I mean the story is about well, it's about the story is about this group of writers who has to write a story, and their story is about alien invasion and the end of the world, that kind of so
right,
like we're talking like big cataclysmic type ideas. So
right.
I was going to ask, was it fun? And was there ever a time when it wasn't fun? It was too heavy. And if so, what do you do about that?
You know, this was a book actually where I did the draft went in a direction that I had planned that I realized at a certain point wasn't working, and I realized that because it became less fun.
Mm.
And fun is a pretty trivial way to talk about it, but it became a struggle to keep it making sense and to keep the narrative kind of rhythm flowing, right? Because I had taken it in, I was trying to force it into into a direction. So in this case, there was that point where I realized, oh, this isn't right. And one of the kind of tells for that, in this case at least, was that it just wasn't fun anymore. It was a struggle. You know, you can't just let kind of just write whatever you want and expect people to appreciate it and like it at the end. You do have to kind of form it and shape it and make sure uh it makes sense. Even so, you kind of want to be writing in a line. You want to be kind of consumed and moving forward through the piece from stage to stage, and have confidence. So in this case, there was a point where I got into a dead end, which is kind of unusual for me because I am a plotter, and I do plot with the characters deeply in mind. So it usually works out. In this case, there was a spot where it didn't hold, had to pull it back, had to reorganize a bunch of stuff and move it in a different directions. So, but other than that, there really wasn't a point that I can remember where it it wasn't fun, where it wasn't entertaining.
Yeah. When you had to sort of make that shift, did you end up in the same place you were originally planning? Did the end the same? You just got there by a different route, or did you?
Yeah,
Oh, okay, all right.
it was
So
because one of my kind of structural rules for myself is I I don't, and this is really different than some people I know, but I don't start something that I don't know how it's going to finish. Now, sometimes it does finish in a different way, but almost never. And I always know where it's going to go because as a storyteller, I feel like it's my job to set up an ending, right? Like
yeah,
I want to take a reader through a journey and I want to give them context in that journey that will pay off at the end. So that's how I approach it, and that's what happened in this case.
Yeah.
We ended up where I thought we were going to end up, which is
In the description of the book, I saw it in a few places. It's described as or feeling like a puzzle.
mhm,
So something to be sort of worked out as you're going through it,
mhm,
as you're reading it. I'm curious about your process for writing a puzzle.
mm,
How do you attack that? You said you're a plotter, so I imagine you at least have some inclination as to the twists and turns of the maze you're going to kind of set out.
right.
But is it is it something that you see it at the end, you perfect it during editing, or is the puzzle itself something you work out ahead of time?
This case, I mean, in this case, the puzzle had to be worked out ahead of time because uh, so the kind of motif of the entire piece is mind control, and these alien snails turn out they're like they do their conquering by taking over the minds of entire planets. They're snails, but they've got some skills. So the puzzle is in because Larry's also in his own mind, and he is himself writing a book that's about mind control and about mind controlling snails. So the puzzle was layering that um, those different sets of realities uh, and sort of comparing them and letting them reflect each other until at the end they were exposed to the extent that they are at the end as being something that you are surprised about. So it really had to be, in this case, worked out very kind of carefully beforehand. And there was a time actually where I thought, oh, that's just too, I can't do that. That's too complicated. What the hell? What am I setting myself up for? And I have writer friends, and I'm like, I often will kind of talk to them about things, talk and I sometimes when I'm just about ready to write a book, I have a couple people who I'll just sit down and voice track it all to them. I don't read it, right? What part of my process is as soon as I can't hold the whole book in my head anymore, that's when I have to start writing. But up to that point, I shouldn't write because there's still little holes to fill in. So I kind of voice tracked it all. I went through it all, and he loved it, but he was like, I'm so glad I'm not writing that book because that sounds horrible. And and it wasn't because I prepared well enough, but there were definitely points where I thought, this is why am I doing this to myself? But frankly, honestly, I kind of end up thinking that about every book I ever write. So this was
Right,
just a different reason
right,
that I wondered why I was doing this to myself.
right, right. While thinking, why am I doing this to myself? You're probably also thinking, how could I not do this to myself? How
Yeah,
can
the
I not
answer
put this
is
story
kind of
down?
why am I doing this to myself? And the answer is always, do I have a choice? And the answer is no, you just don't.
So I'm always curious when writers write stories, particularly anything that fits in a genre. If they are writing a story for themselves, are you a fan of science fiction? So is this the kind of book you would have or still would gravitate to? Is this the kind of book you would pull off the shelf and want to read?
Absolutely. I mean, it's structurally kind of the internal rhythms of it are classic kind of science fiction tropes, if you will. And that's what I read. That's the first thing I read. That's how I learned to read. In fact, was comic books and science fiction novels. So, in that sense, it's definitely a book that I would pull off the shelf. But it's also just a deeply funny and ridiculous book in a character based way. I try to. I When I'm writing, I'm always very careful to to be aware at least of the degree to which I'm editorializing as the writer, right? Like how much am I telling this story? How much am I telling people what to think? Or how much am I just telling the reader what's going on and let them figure out what to think? So I'm just telling people what's going on, and I prefer that kind of writing vastly. I don't like to be told what to think or feel or whatever. Um, so in that sense, it's also a book that I would love to read. And also, it deals with themes and ideas that I think are really important right now in our culture. It's not just an entertaining story, it's a reflection of things that I think are important and meaningful, and ideas that I think that maybe we should be thinking about as a culture, as a world, not just a culture, but as a world, as a collection of cultures. And so I also love those kinds of books where it's a rollicking good story. It's the characters are really clear and true, and it's also more than simply a story. It's a thesis of some kind. But you got to hide that. The thesis. I never want the thesis. I don't like it when the thesis is front and center. Like these are my big thoughts. But if you don't have some big thoughts, then maybe you should wait and write your book until you have some big thoughts.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's
So do those come early for you? Do you know what those are? What and sort of the parameters of those before you start writing? Or is it a case of you're writing, you think, oh, that's really what I'm writing about?
Oh,
That's
there's always that moment, isn't there? I love those moments
hmm
where you go, right? You get
hmm
into it and you're like, "Oh, this is going to be great." And you go, "Oh, that's what I'm actually doing."
Oh,
It's
that's
so
what I'm
exciting when that
exploring.
happens, isn't it? I
It
love that.
is. It is.
I love that. So that definitely happened with this, but you know, I'm a multimodal artist, and my entire life is about art, and most of my work is about art in some way or other, and about storytelling in some way. So this was just sort of a kind of a clearer, more obvious, I suppose, exploration of those ideas that I'm often consumed by. So it wasn't that I was pretty clear going into it what I was going to be talking about. I mean, there were endless surprises and those things where the thesis is fine tuned, and you through writing it you end up understanding better what you actually think as a person.
Right.
Right, it's just like a conversation where people talk, and you come away and you think, oh, that, yeah, I guess that's what I think. So that happens a lot, but in this case I was pretty sure about what I wanted to talk about, and the idea that we go around in the world and we think we know we have these ideas and they seem true, right? And we have these beliefs and they seem true. But in fact, the human brain is just a big kind of story making machine. And the things that we think are true, whether they are or not, are internally just stories, and they're so mutable. It's so stories are so subject to other influences and external influences and whatever. So my thinking is that in this current environment where so we're online, we're all online, and it's just stories, everybody telling their stories, and it's so much that we should pay more attention to our internal stories. That's sort of the generative um idea that pushed this book up onto my desk and made me write it. It's not about that, but that was the thing that started it, and that was really what carried it through.
Yeah. What has the reaction been from people who have read it. You mentioned beta readers giving you some comments about Larry.
Right. Yeah.
Is their reaction to it, their response to it, what you expected, or have there been surprises?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, the feedback about Larry in particular has been was surprising to me because I just see Larry a as a true struggling artist who's got lives with his mom. I mean, he's not a tremendously conventionally successful person, but he seemed not ordinary, but understandable. But the feedback that I got from the very beginning was, oh, how he's so. I, I, People loved how they said he was neurodivergent, deeply neurodivergent, but I never identify it explicitly in the copy. They don't talk about it as neurodivergence. In fact, it's not even talked about. And when they said that, I was like, "Oh, what? He's just a normal person. What are you talking about?" And then, so that was quite surprising because I and I realized, how can I, how could I possibly think that Larry is normal? So you write a book, you're deeply in the world. Everything's just making sense. Of course, this happens and this happens. Like even though if it's magic or whatever, but you
Right.
understand it's all internally logical, and all the characters make sense to you. And then after you're done, you have a different perspective on it. And looking back on it at that point, I realized, wow, he's not ordinary in this sense, but he still makes so much sense to me. How can that possibly be? Because a really interesting insight into my own internal processes, which I think are not ordinary or something, you know.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Learn something with every process, don't you? With every try.
You really do.
Well, what is up next for you? I mean, where do you go from here?
I have several other books uh, that are kind of lined up. I'm going to be. Working on a musical right now. I'm working on a theatrical production. So probably the next thing towards the end of the year will be completing that and getting some readings and maybe standing something up in LA, some little theaters, and then after that, go back and continue writing more books. I want to write some books about pirates. I've always loved
Yeah,
pirates.
exciting. Very good.
Yes.
All right. Well, if people want to learn more about you and the book, look for new releases, projects you have going on, that sort of thing, where should they go to find you and that information?
Probably my website's the best, kevinhincker.com. So it's my last name, Hincker, kevinhincker.com. And all my books are listed there. There's whatever information you might want to know about me. You could contact me, blah, blah, blah. It's just the author website.
Good. And if they want to purchase a copy of The Story Eaters of Yamm, where should they
That
go to
will
buy it?
be published on June 16th, and it will be available on Amazon. Uh, After that, potentially other platforms, but we'll just start it out on Amazon.
Very good. Very good. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with The Story Eaters of Yamm and all the projects that you have going on. Sounds like you're going to be very busy for quite a while. So, congratulations on all of that, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you so much, Stacy. This has been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, Find a new author and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the bookshop at the end of the internet.